everybody. Welcome to Frenemies of the People by Culloton Bauer Luce. I'm Dennis. That's Eleni. There's Natalie. We're going to tell you about our very special guest in just a second. We love the media, and for the most part, and we can't quit politics, although we should. We're still not sponsored by Diet Coke or Eleni by Wally's, but we're going to work on that. So this special episode may change that for all of our corporate sponsors. We have Greg Pratt, who not only is a big-time journalist with the Chicago Tribune, but he is now an author of The City is Up for Grabs, how Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot led and lost a city in crisis. Greg, welcome. Thanks for carving a few minutes out of your post-holiday workday to join this little group.
Thanks for having me.
You know, it was crazy to read this book because you realize just the dizzying number of things that happened during her time as mayor and even in her campaign for mayor. And even though we all lived through it and we read all of your stories, Greg, there were some things that I'd forgotten. And also you did an excellent job of sort of getting to the root of who the mayor was as a person, as a professional. And, you know, for someone who was so smart and so accomplished, to still be so ill-suited for mayor tells you just how difficult that job is. And I just wanted to, I don't think a lot of people knew a lot about Mayor Lightfoot before she became mayor. And one of the things that you found is that one of her very strong qualities is a sort of fearlessness and courage. And she called out racism by big law in Chicago long before this was fashionable.
Yeah, it's one of those really, really instructive, really cool stories about Lori Lightfoot where they were doing interviews. It was the biggest law firm in the world at the time, and they came to the University of Chicago to do recruitment. And they were asking all sorts of really racist questions. If I'm recalling right, they might have outright used the N-word at one point, like asking somebody, hey, how would you feel if we used the N-word? This is like 1987, by the way, so it's not cool at any time, but some crazy stuff. And she went out and she called them out. She wrote an article about it for a college paper, and the guy went down and disgraced.
Dean Jeffrey Stone took action too. I mean,
yeah, and but you know, she could have been blacklisted for that for the rest of her life. She could have absolutely gotten herself into a lot of trouble, and she didn't care. She went after it, and you know that's a really good quality to have when you're calling out something that is clearly unequivocally wrong. Not to immediately shift into the problem with that, but you can't. You know, that's like, yes, that is somebody you should kick in the butt as hard as you can. But you can't kick everybody in the butt as hard as you can just because they're wrong, because there's different levels of wrong. And so, you know, but that's Lori. She's a butt kicker.
So, you know, a lot of how people assess her time as mayor, and maybe at times this was even some of the things that she had said, that, you know, she had terrible luck, but her political career, at least her electoral political career, started with some extremely good luck off of other people's misfortune. And I guess what I'm referring to primarily is Laquan McDonald, the teenager who was gunned down by a Chicago police officer with 16 shots on the streets of Chicago in the mid-2010s when Rahm Emanuel was still mayor. And that, in a strange twist of fate, was a big launch pad for her political career.
Yeah, there's that, and then there's obviously Ed Burke getting into legal trouble during the campaign, and
Yeah,
his
and you reference that as the butcher paper, right? That's the whole chapter in your book.
yeah, and um, and she did not miss her chance. I mean, she was chugging along as a distant, far off, nothing candidate, and then the Burke stuff happened, and she caught fire. And that's one of those things that happens in sports too, where you gotta just hang around, and you hang around long enough, and something might happen in the game. Maybe the other person isn't. It's the tortoise and the hare, and so that's. I think my dog is trying to get up here.
That's all right. You're welcome. We
She
need all the viewers we can get on the clicks we can get.
so
What's the
she
name of your
is.
dog?
This is Sadie, and she is
Sadie.
very passionate about municipal government, and
I can
and she
imagine.
also,
Household.
she's a. But yeah, Mayor Lightfoot absolutely, turned her focus to policing after Laquan McDonald, and then she turned her focus to corruption after Ed Burke, and that's one of those things. One of the lessons I draw from that sometimes that I talk to about with political professionals and people from all walks of life is you have to know why you won. And she won because the race became about something it wasn't initially about. She didn't won because everybody thought that she was the world's greatest savior of a city. She didn't won because everybody thought she had the nicest smile and the best plans. She won because of a moment in time, and that happens to all of us in all sorts of situations. And if you don't understand luck, if you don't understand circumstance, you're going to get yourself into a lot of trouble. And if you're assuming that 76% of the public agreed with you on 90% of the issues, you're doomed.
And of course, the butcher paper was over Ed Berg's office because during the middle of the mayoral race back in 2019, his office was raided by the FBI. And later on, of course, a federal jury convicted him, and he has been sentenced to prison. So, Eleni, I guess first you got to make the political playoffs, and to Greg's point, you gotta be ready to hit that opening when it's there.
Well, I have a question, Greg. So I think we likely all have various tales about working or interacting with the Lightfoot administration during her tenure. Obviously, you've had quite the saga in that front. So I guess I'm curious, was there a moment where you were like, this needs to be a book? Like, I need to write this. Like, was there like a moment for you where that clicked and you were like, I'm writing this down and publishing this?
Yeah, it was the riots, the civil unrest, the looting, and the protest after George Floyd, and how the city of Chicago handled it. Sometimes we take for granted that we sort of forget. We don't take for granted. We forget how bad it was. Chicago and Minneapolis got hit really hard. Other places had some incidents. I mean, part of the south side of the city was huge chunks of the south side were destroyed. A lot of businesses were damaged. There were a lot of fires. A whole lot of people were killed. I mean, there was a lot of trouble, and I reported that myself as a not just as a political reporter, but as a neighborhood guy. Where that Sunday, when the looting spread into the neighborhoods, I had been on furlough because we were having an issue at the Tribune where, for cost cutting, they had put everybody down for a week. So I come in right as this is starting. I get a call from my editor first thing in the morning. Do you wanna work today? There's a lot of unrest. I said, yeah. I got on a bike. I biked downtown. All the bridges are up. You have to find that one bridge that's open. I got a car, and then I drove all over the south side of Chicago. A couple colleagues were on the west side, but I was the only one on the south side. I saw firsthand all these stores being looted, all of these some remnants of fires, all this damage being done, and the cops were overwhelmed. And I talked to Lori Lightfoot that night. You know, she called me. She was really depressed about it. She was really depressed about what had happened in her city. She was really depressed about what she had seen. She was upset. She was angry. And I was pretty upset and angry and disgusted. And I thought, well, how we come out of this is going to be a major story. The title of the book comes from a text she sent during the riots. And so that was kind of the moment. I always thought it would be cool to write a book about the Chicago mayor. And, you know, no matter what, her 4 years were going to be interesting. But that's what it became. This is the time for the city that we are going to be thinking about for decades.
I am still shocked that the bridges up imagery never made it into a political ad in the subsequent mayoral race, because I think that visual said so much about how she approaches politics and how she approached managing her administration, which is no bridges to anywhere.
No bridges to anywhere is a nice way to put it.
It could be your next book.
I think if she had made the runoff, and especially against a lefty, you might have seen it that way. But she didn't. She didn't make the runoff, and nobody really had money to run against her in the first round. They were busy beating each other up. Vallis was busy introducing himself. So was Brandon Johnson. Chewy was hoarding his money, just sitting around, wasting his time. That's an example of a candidate not making the most of their moment. You know, to continue the basketball, a one seed choking. But I digress.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Post the riots, she continued to, it seems from the way you saw the narrative, and it's my recollection, I think our recollection of reading all the coverage in those days as well, that she continued to be angry and perhaps temperamental, and to double down on some of what were both her greatest strengths and her greatest weakness. So she's brought to power through a police misconduct case, and then she has a major mishandling of a police misconduct case, and you were sort of in the middle of one of the side skirmishes involved with uncovering that story.
Is that
The
Angela
Angelina Young?
Young?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's. I think she doesn't get enough scrutiny for how she handled that either. You know, where she was not honest with the public about what happened, and she would say I forgot, but she popped off when she got asked questions about how this thing had happened, and she's like, I've never even heard of this woman. I don't know anything about this case. And that was false. I mean, she had gotten this detailed answer, and that was the thing about Lori Lightfoot, is she always wanted to be right. And as anybody who's ever been married can tell you, you can be right or you can be married, and that's very much true in politics. And there's things you have to be right about, right? But you can't hog the remote control every night because you're gonna get yourself into trouble. You know, at some point they're gonna get tired of watching the Simpsons. So that's one of those things that Mayor Lightfoot got herself into trouble with Angelina Young, and she never could figure out exactly what mayor she wanted to be. You know, she is, and the law enforcement issue, on that issue, she wanted to be the cop's best friend, but she wanted to be their biggest critic, and she wanted to do all of these things. And I remember there was a police officer during the riots who had flipped off some protesters, which was wrong, and he shouldn't have done it, and he needs to keep his cool. And she like angrily does the presser talking about how he needs to be fired for how he behaved. And you know, first of all, realistically, you're never going to get a cop fired for flipping someone off. It's just not going to happen when you go through that process. And number two, is that really the appropriate response? Probably not. You know, like if you think a police officer should lose his livelihood for flipping a bird, I mean, that's pretty strong, you know, especially if he doesn't have another history of other issues. Obviously, there should be some discipline for that because you have to do that. all of that gets back to Anjanette Young, where she wanted to be the cop's friend. She wanted to be their critic. She wanted to be on all sides of the issue. And there's a little story where she got into it with Kim Fox, where Kim Fox had criticized her, and she went to her office and Kim and Lori said, "You shouldn't have criticized me." She said, "I criticized the city," and Lori said, "I am the city." Julius Caesar or Emperor Palpatine style from Star Wars. And so it was this, but all of that is to say that she had a lot of issues, and I think part of it comes from a desire to want to be right in any situation, and that being your main consistency.
And Natalie, some of her friends, including our colleague Carolyn Grisco, remarked that they couldn't believe what they were watching there because Anjanette Young was a social worker, innocent person, just getting ready for bed, and the police raided the wrong house. And as is often the case, the cover-up was the city's denial to provide the video and the other documents that the media needed, and her own lawyer, Anjanette's lawyer, needed to prove that case.
Yeah, and I think what Greg said earlier is sort of on point in terms of she never really knew the type of mayor she wanted to be because she, her rise was through all of the reforms with COPA and the necessary police reforms that really became spotlighted post Laquan McDonald, and she didn't know where the line was for her in terms of, are you buddies with the police or are you here to continue the mantle of reform? So it was always very inconsistent. And I think the only time where, her administration really was, in solid shape was those early days of COVID where, we had all the memes of her everywhere. It was the one and only time where she was consistent, and it was stay home and just getting control over what was happening on the ground. In those early days of the pandemic, and as the previous mayor to Lightfoot always said, you never let a good crisis go to waste. And so she really could have, had she taken the lessons from that moment of consistency and leadership, as opposed to like the former prosecutor she was, everything is a nail to her and she's the hammer. She really could have done something instead of being known as bridges up Lightfoot. So.
Well, we certainly wanted to cover a little bit about what you're doing now, Greg. And by the way, we are just very happy that Sadie was able to join us. So please allow her to have a word if she would like. I'm just wondering, Eleni, does Greg think the city is still up for grabs?
Yeah, I was going to go there, and I know that we have a new administration now. Lori is come and gone. Now we have Brandon Johnson. Are we going to see a city is up for grabs part 2? Or where do you think your head's at on this one?
I hope that, well, number one, is the city still up for grabs? The answer is yes. The city is in a lot of political instability, which is part of the play of the title as well. It's up for grabs in other ways. When you go from Ed Burke, who'd been there for 30 years as finance committee chairman, to that's another way the city's up for grabs. When you see Madigan going away, up for grabs. And then when you have the teachers union takes over the city of Chicago, it's also still up for grabs. And if Brandon Johnson wins his reelection, it's no longer up for grabs in that way. The political system will have congealed a little bit more in favor of the teachers union and their agenda. Do I want to write another book about Mayor Johnson? Heck yes, as the dogs like to say. And so, and there's a lot to that. It is an interesting time of what happens when you have a hyper progressive mayor takes office, and so far. You have a lot of issues following through on their vision. You have a lot of issues, maybe above all else, communicating. Like if Rahm Emanuel was in office and the crime numbers had gone down the way they had gone down, he'd be having a press conference 3 times a week to communicate that and to take credit for that. So there's a variety of stuff, and then the third piece of the question of, you know, is it up for grabs for him politically? Yes, it is. You know, he is going to have a tough reelection battle, but not an impossible one, which I think people over, you know, they see one poll that says he's at 7% and they assume he's doomed, and it's like that is not the case. He's in serious trouble, but it's not that easy.
Yeah, those polling numbers are always different when you have someone to compare him against, whether it's a one-on-one or a field. And it looks like, I don't know what you're hearing, Greg, like it's going to be another very large field of wannabe mayors trying to challenge him.
Yeah, you know, one of my least favorite genres of political reporting is like of every serious person and then every goof floating their name out there, and you get a lot of goofs, and there's plenty of serious people, and then there's a lot of goofs, and so, you know, how many of them take the plunge and fight? You know, that's something I admired about Lori Lightfoot. It's something I admire about Brandon Johnson. Something I admire about Paul Vallis is they want to go out there and compete, and whether you like them or not, they are competing for their ideas and for the way that they see the story. And so, how many people are actually going to run? Who knows? But it will be fun. It will be fun to watch, and there's obviously a lot of jockeying these days.
Well, I would vote for Sadie. Sadie was running.
I want to put her on a billboard, so maybe we can do that.
All right, let's get to our favorite part of this humble little podcast. Sounds terrible, can't wait. And I'll lead off, Greg, so you can kind of see where my head's at on this, and my colleagues can also show you. So Eleni has a big international trip planned soon with her children. And that sounds terrible enough, but even more terrible, there's a travel writer named Tiffany Hawk, and she used to be a flight attendant before she was a travel writer. And she pointed out that airplane carpets don't get cleaned very frequently.
Why are
So
you doing this to her?
don't walk around barefoot or in stocking feet because, as she pointed out, the cabin can get bumpy when the plane flies through turbulence. The liquid on the lavatory floor might not be water. So, flying internationally.
I,
Oh
I,
my gosh,
terrible.
Eleni.
Yeah, well,
where I mean, the plus the win out of the trip is if nobody licks the window or puts their mouth on the window, either at the airport or on the plane. Like, if that doesn't happen, we've won the trip. Like, we could just fly and come back home, and that's it. Like, we won. So the
maybe if you don't
carpet,
walk
I'm
around
not
barefoot
as
for
worried
night,
about the
kids might have
carpet.
been on that plane.
Are
Yeah.
you not supposed to lick the window?
We should ask the travel writer.
Eleni, I've just assailed your children.
Thank you so
what
much.
sounds terrible to you?
Honestly, when I was thinking about having this conversation, I thought of something that really is going to sound terrible, and I'm guessing being the FOIA officer for the city of Chicago or the mayor's office. Like, I can't imagine, just based on the book that you wrote, Greg, what kind of assault takes place on a daily basis to that person. And I know it's a job they sign up for, but wow, does that sound terrible, and just continues to get worse as the administrations go by at this point. So I would say that's my sounds terrible today.
It's pretty
Yeah,
terrible.
the thing that people don't realize about my FOIA requests is that I submit them in crayon, so it's even harder than it's harder than it looks.
Sadie writes.
Color crayon.
Sadie writes them too. If it's a really hot FOIA request, I do it in red, and so, you know, just to convey the message that I'm serious about it. Actually, you know, they say tip your bartender. You should always be nice to the FOIA officer. But they have a tough job, and they're not the one who's trying to screw you.
Exactly. They're usually trying to do the right thing, and somebody else is finding loopholes and ways to get around getting you what you need. So I feel that.
What do you think, Natalie? What's terrible coming up?
Well, I am, it's going to be terrible. My husband's traveling for business, and so I'm going to be solo momming it. I'm going to have to make sure that my kids don't lick the windows. So that's my goal.
Or maybe that's the least damaging alternative.
My carpet is clean though. There's no
Let the
pee
record
on my
reflect. Okay, Greg, big finish. What sounds terrible to you?
Do you guys all know what a banner plane is?
Yes.
So a plane with a banner attached to it. Now Sadie does not mind the air and water show. She does not mind the police helicopters that come by, but we live by the lakefront. She doesn't mind normal airplanes. She doesn't mind the Navy jets. But if she sees or hears a banner plane, she goes nuts. And I think the problem is commercialism. I think that she's anti-commercialism and consumerism. I think that she's a very simple dog. She just wants treats and belly rubs. Question, but she can. She hears a plane, and she will stop in her tracks. And then me or Nina will stop and look up, and it's like it's a banner plane. You can see it's dragging it, and sometimes she can hear it and she stops and she looks up, and if it doesn't have the banner, she goes back to normal. But if it there's something about the way it sounds. I don't know if they're old Cessnas or something, or if there's a type of plane, but she knows which ones they are. And if she could climb into heaven and rain down thunderbolts on them, she would.
That's amazing.
Well, Grace, I guess you should 86, producer Grace, you should 86 our Frenemies of the People banner that we were going to fly along the lakefront next week to promote this pod. Hey, if it's terrible, it's Frenemies of the People. Producer Grace is our producer. She also draws stuff at Grace Draws Stuff on a number of platforms. And we're still not sponsored, but we look forward to seeing you all soon.